Earth is warming, and it is happening at the fastest rate in recorded history. Scientists credit the rise of fossil fuel economies and accelerating CO2 emissions since the end of World War II as the cause for our current climate crisis. To understand where we are today, we have to go back, way back, to 4.5 billion years ago. Long before humans arrived, the Earth had been warming, cooling, erupting, cracking, enduring meteorites and slipping in and out of ice ages. These natural cycle events have led to mass extinctions and the emergence of mankind around 6 million years ago. From loincloths and spears, mankind transitioned into the agricultural revolution around 12,000 years ago. Then one day, a man landed on a new world with 3 sailing ships. Shortly after, there was a mass migration from the east to the western hemisphere. Then mankind hit the second jackpot with the discovery of something called fossil fuels, ancient plant and animal matter buried deep underground in the form of coal, natural gas, and oil. Sometime in the 18th century, people realized that if they burned coal in bulk, it could be used to generate steam. And with that came the steam engine, which made it possible to develop factories and to generate electricity. And so began the era of the Industrial Revolution. Steam propelled our species from 1.6 billion humans in 1900 to 7.7 billion by 2020. And with that came a modern civilization powered almost entirely by ancient fossils. Climate change is the long-term alteration of the Earth's weather patterns. It took nearly a century of research and data to convince the vast majority of the scientific community that human activity could alter the climate of our entire planet. The concentration of carbon dioxide or CO2, also known as greenhouse gas, has increased significantly as a result of the Industrial Revolution and exponential growth in manufacturing activities around the world. Deforestation, agriculture, and fossil fuel use are the primary sources of greenhouse gases. Research has shown that the Earth's temperature has increased by about 1 degree Fahrenheit in the last 100 years. 2019 was the second hottest year in recorded history. China is the largest emitter of carbon dioxide gas in the world, with 9.9 billion metric tons recorded in 2019. About 58% of the total energy generated by China in 2019 came from burning coal alone, and because coal is rich in carbon, burning it in power and industrial plants and boilers release large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. Following China are the United States with 4.7 billion metric tons, India with 2.3 billion metric tons, Russia with 1.6 billion metric tons, and Japan with 1.1 billion metric tons. Their main source of pollution comes from transportation, industry, and power generation. Because of this exponential increase in pollution, the Earth is getting hotter in some regions, wetter in others, and weather patterns are becoming unpredictable with crippling effects on lives and livelihoods, especially in small island developing states.
I used to survive by pumping water from the river, and the river has more water to pump with my capacity that I have, right? Because I used to do 120 acres of bananas here at one time. I've reduced that to 0 and leasing out the lands instead, and the people that are leasing from me now, they're going through even more difficult times.
While patterns vary among islands, many small islands are facing drought and reduced levels of annual precipitation as global temperatures rise, leading to freshwater scarcity and threatening food security.
I have a pump that I invested, how much is it, $70,000 on a pump? Yeah, to do 100 acres plus. I used to do this 100 acres and switch it over by night into a dam on the hill where we grow exotics, mangoes and all different kinds of things. There is no water to pump, to use that pump anymore. It's packed in the yard. Now I'm in the process of building a pump that would facilitate me with this present condition, right? Will there be water in the next 3-4 years? I don't know. We'll probably be going to the sea for water.
I showed you a river earlier that used to be full with water. That's where I had my irrigation set up. And because of the dry spell, I actually had to remove the irrigation system there because there was no water in the river. And I had to take a longer route to go to the Trumase River, where I would have to spend thousands of dollars in pipelines just to get water to this farm. Climate change is as real as the sun rising tomorrow morning. There are times when the farmers would harvest their yams and get nothing from there because the sun has actually burnt up everything. The vines, even the yam under the ground that it is going to affect. The dashing farmers, sometimes they complain. They go to uproot the dashing and nothing because it's as if the earth sucks it up because of the dry season.
Rising levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide reduce the concentrations of proteins and essential minerals in most plant species and significantly decrease their nutritional value. This presents a potential threat to the supply of essential crops and the demands on central government for farm subsidies and relief.
A mango that used to weigh 2.5 pounds, now it only weighs 1 pound. And the one that weighed 1 pound 5 years ago, half a pound, quarter pound. That's where we're heading. I mean, the coconuts, problems. We grow the dwarf coconuts. We have them growing after 2.5 years. You can pick them off the ground on the bunch. There's hardly any water in there. Years ago, when you drank one coconut, you felt satisfied. Now you have to drink 2 or 3.
Farmers are assaulted by both sides of the climate change sword.
I produce 27 tons per acre per annum here on this land. It is banana land. But over these years, we have had serious flooding. And we have serious silt deposits on this ground, up to about 2 and 3 feet in some areas. So we have lost our topsoil. And that's making life very difficult.
As it relates to what is in place for the rainy season, I can give all praise to the Taiwanese mission. Because somewhere behind me you can see some hoop greenhouses. That's what was provided for me by the Taiwanese mission. So in the event you get excess water, you can bring down these greenhouses. They will cover your plants, protect your plants from the excess water.
Oceans play a major role in climate dynamics. 83% of the global carbon cycle is circulated through the oceans. They have absorbed 93% of the excess heat from greenhouse gas emissions since the 1970s. The oceans are also home to between 500,000 and 10 million species, contributing enormously to the biodiversity of our planet. Climate change threatens fish stock, but also creates new opportunities for fishing. Areas in the tropics are predicted to see declines of up to 40% in potential seafood catch by 2050. In contrast, areas in higher altitudes such as the North Atlantic and North Pacific are seeing increases in the range of some fish species.
Most of our migratory species in particular, they're not seeing as many. The routes are different. The catchability of the fish is becoming reduced. For example, the dolphin fish, what we have been seeing is that St. Lucia is getting smaller dolphin fish being landed. So there are some cues that we are aware of, but we don't have the big picture.
Rising ocean temperatures and increased acidity make it more difficult for marine organisms such as shrimp, oysters or coral to form their shells, a process known as calcification. The entire marine food web is being altered and may result in a crack in the food chain. Consequently, the distribution, productivity, and species composition of global fish production are changing, generating complex and interrelated impacts on oceans, estuaries, and seagrass beds that provide habitats and nursery areas for fish.
Most of our fisheries facilities are on the coast of St. Lucia, and that has an impact on them. And not forgetting our fisher folk, which most of them would be living in communities which are vulnerable to floods, storms, etc.
The impact of climate change is a story of water, the lack of, the impact due to excess, the abstraction and supply of, and the lack thereof.
We've actually witnessed a reduction in the flows at our intakes. As you know, we have surface water sources which relies mainly on rainwater. This year, we saw a reduction of up to 80% at some of our sources. And definitely that impacted our ability to provide water to consumers. Even with the flip side, we do have some issues because with heavy rainfall events, we have a lot of erosion and siltation, and some of our treatment facilities can't handle that level of turbidity. So we would have to shut down some of those facilities because we just can't handle that level of turbidity.
We are doing bad this time around because by June into July, we should be able to fill up the dam. We should have a good level, but right now the levels at the dam is so low that we cannot even sustain 3 to 4 pumps at the dam. We have to conserve what we have. If we continue to extract the way that we are extracting the water there, by July we don't have nothing.
Climate change is a threat to everyone's physical and mental health. It also impacts air, water, food and shelter. But some groups, socially and economically disadvantaged ones, face the greatest risks, largely due to where they live, their health, income, language barriers, and limited access to resources. In time, they will suffer the worst impacts of climate change unless we recognize that fighting climate change and environmental justice are inextricably linked. Extreme weather events can cause injury, illness, and death. Changing in precipitation patterns and warming water temperatures enable bacteria, viruses, parasites, and toxic algae to flourish. Heavy rains and flood can pollute drinking water and increase our contamination, potentially causing gastrointestinal illnesses like diarrhea and damaging livers and kidneys. Extreme weather events also disrupt electrical power, water systems, and transportation, as well as the communication networks needed to access emergency services and healthcare. Disadvantaged communities are particularly at risk because subpar housing with old infrastructure may be more vulnerable to power outages, water issues, and damage. In addition, they may not have access to transportation to escape the impacts of extreme weather, or home insurance and other resources to relocate or rebuild after a disaster. Hence the need for climate justice.
Climate justice really looks at two things. First of all, in responding to climate change, how do we ensure that the measures that we put in place benefit everyone and no one is left behind? And secondly, where there are benefits from the response, so for example in renewable energy, that again, everyone benefits from this. It's not just people who are in a particular income bracket. So climate justice looks at a kind of restorative justice for the people who are at the heart of this climate crisis.
A New England University study shows global warming has increased economic inequality since the 1960s. Temperature changes caused by growing concentrations of greenhouse gases in Earth's atmosphere have enriched cool countries like Norway and Sweden, while dragging down economic growth in warmer countries, especially small island developing states.
You're talking fishers and farmers who've played no role whatsoever. They've not contributed not one small percentage or fraction of a percentage to global greenhouse gases, but they're the ones now who are finding that their livelihoods are being impacted. People who are living in areas that might have been flood prone before, but now we're finding that, again, because of increased flooding, they now have to abandon their homes. People in a place like Dominica, Petit Savan in Dominica, who've had to abandon a community that they lived in, that their parents, their grandparents lived in, because of climate change. So those are the people who are most vulnerable and who are feeling the impacts of climate change.
Climate justice requires deliberate attention to how resources can be directed to reduce development disparities. The World Bank has calculated the price of climate-proofing development assistance and foreign and domestic investment at between US $9 billion and $41 billion annually from 2010 to 2015, with costs after that jumping to US $80 billion to cover a variety of impacts. As such, it has provided $68 million through the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project to help various agencies with climate change mitigation and adaptation initiatives in St. Lucia. The St. Lucia Development Bank received $5 million to on-lend to clients at concessionary rates for adaptation initiatives.
There are three sectors which we have identified: the agricultural sector, households, and the business sector. As it relates to the agricultural sector, we grant loans for farmers to invest in rainwater harvesting, irrigation system, greenhouses, and even heat-resistant crops. As it relates to households, we would enable clients to fund the strengthening of the roofing of their homes.
The St. Lucia Electricity Services Limited, Lucelec, is the biggest consumer of fossil fuel in St. Lucia, burning through 20 million gallons of diesel annually. Thanks to the adoption of the National Energy Transition Strategy, small green strides are being made to reduce its footprint.
One of the first initiatives is the construction of a 3 megawatt solar farm. The operation of this solar farm has resulted in us saving approximately 300,000 gallons of diesel fuel, and this has resulted in a reduction in our fuel costs of over $2 million.
The 2019 United States Congressional Resolution recognizing the duty of the federal government to create a new Green Deal, introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Murkey, advocated for a just transition, counteracting previous systemic injustices that had disproportionately hurt vulnerable countries.
So the Green New Deal really speaks to the decarbonization of the European Union. How will they transition their economies away from fossil fuels, coal particularly for some of them, but natural gas and diesel and gasoline to some extent, and now move to renewable sources of energy.
Over the past 3 decades, there has never been a shortage of heads of government meetings. Tree huggers have narrated the inconvenient truth, and a series of climate conferences geared to draw attention to the crisis which is slowly roasting our earth. But is all of this talk just lip service while small island developing states slowly drown and roast?
The discussion has to pivot to one of climate justice, where we now start looking at other means. We now start looking at litigation. Can we now hold some of these countries and companies liable for the death and destruction that we're seeing in our countries? I think that has to be something. So in addition to the gentlemanly approach that we're taking, there also has to be an approach that says we're getting a lot more serious about this, because every day that goes, every week that goes, every year that goes without you taking action is us getting closer and closer to the edge of that cliff that we will not be able to pull ourselves back from.
In pursuit of climate justice for the most vulnerable nations, development partners can help SIDS explore new approaches to breaking dependence on fossil fuels, build climate resilience, and grasp the opportunity of the blue economy for sustainable development. Development partners need to encourage a transition to low-carbon economies, including by helping SIDS address barriers to investment in renewable energy, such as high initial cost. This would in turn significantly reduce the import bill of SIDS, with positive impacts on the fiscal space available for sustainable development investments. Development partners could also do more to help SIDS integrate climate and disaster risk into national policies and planning to facilitate greater access to climate financing, to restore and improve the lives and livelihoods of those most affected by climate change.